Thanks for tuning in to another Smart Driving Cars podcast. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more information, head to motoetf.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alain Kornhauser. Hi, Alain.
Hey, good morning, Fred.
Good morning. And we are happy to have joining us Tim Higgins from the Wall Street Journal, author of a new book arriving Tuesday titled Power Play, Tesla, Elon Musk, and the Bet of the Century. Thanks for taking the time with us, Tim.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great to have you, Tim.
Well, congratulations on what for many of us will be a must-read book. And the reviews from Walter Isaacson in the New York Times and Russ Mitchell in the Los Angeles Times have got to make you feel pretty good.
Well, I'm hoping people will like it. You spend a number of years on these things and you hope people will read it up.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. I know I am. I mean, intriguing.
How long did you spend on this book, Tim?
It's interesting. I began working on this book in 2018. And at the time, I thought it was going to be a story of the collapse, the very public collapse of Tesla. As you recall, as the company was trying to bring out the Model 3, it was a real struggle. But as time went on and as I worked on the book, it became very clear this was a different story altogether. This was a story of probably one of the most remarkable corporate turnarounds of this generation. And to be able to say how Tesla went in 2003 from being a rather improbable idea of bringing electric cars to the mainstream to 2020 being the world's most valuable automaker. That is a remarkable drama and something that I think a lot of people will be interested in understanding how that occurred.
Absolutely. Now, tell our listeners and viewers a bit about your background and what led you to doing this book.
Yeah, so I spent a number of years in Detroit writing about the automotive industry. I saw the breakup of Daimler Chrysler. I saw the bankruptcy of General Motors, and then the rise and return of the Detroit auto industry. Mary Barra became CEO. And after a number of years there, I thought, well, it's kind of hard to imagine anything more exciting happening in this industry. Those are all once in a lifetime kind of events. And so I transferred out to San Francisco, where I started covering Apple at the time. I was working for Bloomberg and really became more aware in a serious way the efforts in the Valley to develop autonomous vehicles and really auto tech in general. And that was pretty exciting period of time there. And eventually I joined the Wall Street Journal covering kind of the future of cars and including Tesla, and really got to understand that company in a new way. And I had been wrong in Detroit. There was something very interesting going on in the auto industry, a once in a generation kind of thing that we were seeing some major developments occurring, whether it was going to be with autonomy or whether it was going to be electrification. These were things that are sometimes hard to understand when you're deeply rooted in the old way of doing things, which is, probably one of the challenges that traditional automakers have when they think about how the road could be different ahead. And one of the benefits that maybe Tesla had early on was that it had no kind of history with how things had been done.
Interesting. Now, Tesla doesn't even have a public relations department to speak of, other than Elon Musk, I suppose. So how challenging was this to get the information and the stories that you wanted to be able to write a book like this?
Well, this was an incredibly challenging reporting assignment. Really, one of the goals I had was, to get past the kind of popular myth that Elon Musk has put out there that his personal heroics had saved the company. And no doubt, there would be no Tesla without Elon Musk, but there would be no Tesla without the scores and scores of people behind the scenes who helped develop the Roadster, the Model S, the Model X, the Model 3, designed it, engineered it, manufactured it, and sold it. And at those steps, every way, very interesting dramas, very interesting stories of sacrifice, ups and downs. These were stories that had been sometimes told, but oftentimes not told in any meaningful way. In this book, I aim to kind of tell the definitive history of how Tesla became to be, and how it got to this point in time, warts and all. There are good things, there are bad things, there are just things that I leave to the reader to decide. Because one of the things about Tesla and Elon Musk are people come to it with so many different perspectives. It is, on fire on social media all the time. People want to debate it. And, part of that is because the world is changing and Tesla is part of that change.
Yeah, it's really interesting you point out, because the innovation in the car industry, it's been tough to find. I mean, at one point GM tried Saturn, and in some sense Saturn was supposed to be something like a brand new car company with a new thing and so on, and of course the EV1 was in there somewhere along the road, and they tried the whole darn thing, and it's not been easy, because it really isn't easy to manufacture a car when you look at the reliability that the car needs to have to just not be a lemon. Just to not be a lemon is just phenomenal, and it's just not easy.
Well, Alan, you hit it on the head there. And in the book, I spent a lot of time talking about how the EV1 had influenced and inspired the Tesla company and the original Roadster. And GM is a theme throughout the book, because in a lot of ways, GM had thought about a lot of these things. They're not a bunch of dummies at the Renaissance Center in Detroit, where GM's headquarters are located. These are smart people, and some people there could see the future. There was this EV1, as you talk about, but in some ways it was ahead of its time. I've ridden in the EV1, and it's like riding in the vision of what the future would be. It's almost like a spaceship that was designed a generation ago, where the middle has a bunch of buttons, and it's just a weird experience. And people in California that had it, remember, it was leased out for a number of years. People loved it. People that had it loved it, but it was full of compromises. Whether it was range or just comfort, or it was a two-seater, for example. I mean, it just, it stood out. And another thing that you have to remember, that early on, the electrification of the automobile was seen as something that was going to appeal to people that wanted to save money. And so there was always this push to make it as cheap as possible. And you remember the Prius, the Prius kind of looked a little weird when it came out, the hybrid Prius. And the idea was that you wanted to stand out because you were green. And the bet that Tesla was making, in particular, the bet that Elon Musk was making, was that if you could make the world's best car that just happened to be electric, then it wouldn't matter to people. They would just buy it. And it would show the world that the electrification of the automobile was possible and attainable, and you didn't have to make life full of compromises. And that is really kind of one of the key driving things of Tesla's early days that they were pursuing, that set them apart from everybody else.
Yeah, one of the things that I sort of, and of course I don't know Elon, but from a way distant outside, one of the things that I see about him is he picks up on some fundamentals, and then basically plays those fundamentals to the hilt. I mean, to me, one of the fundamentals of the electric vehicle, of a Tesla, half as many parts. Man, when you look at that, that means something. I mean, you can leverage that for something. I mean, how do you take those kinds of fundamentals that he seems to pounce on and really deliver?
Well, for sure. One of the several interesting anecdotes in the book kind of get into how they do product development there. And early on, he was super frustrated with the people he was hiring. And some of them were among some of the most interesting people in the auto industry, but they had a way of thinking about the future that was very similar to what they were doing at their previous employer. And this frustrated him greatly. And once he became CEO and had money kind of secured to keep the company afloat, he could really turn to development of the Model S. One of the key things that I think is underappreciated about those days was the team that he built. He's got an excellent nose for talent, and finding people who can share his vision and then motivating them in a way where they feel like they are part of a mission. that they are reaching for the stars, trying to do something impossible, and that they are all in it together. And that was a key thing on the Model S, at finding people who are willing to do it a little bit different. And in that, you see that in the Model S with the way they develop that. And it really comes into play in the Model 3, where to this point that you make about, really drilling into the details of the vehicle, that to save monies in certain ways, where then they have to spend money elsewhere on the battery packs and everything like that. So it's important. Another part of Elon's kind of framework for deciding things is he doesn't want to do something just because that's always the way to do it. This kind of cliche, well, that's the way we do kind of answer to engineering. He wants to kind of drill into the why something happens, what's the outcome, and this sort of thing, which can be incredibly frustrating if you work for him and you just have to do one part. And, why is this becoming this thing? Well, maybe you find a better way to do it. Maybe you find savings to do it. But the downside of that is sometimes it wastes a lot of time. So sometimes there's a reason why you just do it the way it's done. I think, for example, at a certain point, Elon wanted to have windshield wipers that would turn on automatically when it started to rain. And the company already had camera shooting out into the world in the windshield for its Autopilot system. So why not just use that instead of using the sensor that every other car company has for that exact kind of function? And so, seems simple enough. Well, the actual kind of programming to enable that to happen was a lot harder than anybody anticipated.
Yeah, and the way other people do it, it blocks GPS through your windshield, and so your GPS receiver, if it happens to be inside, doesn't work. I mean,
Right.
it attenuates the signal. But forget about that. You mentioned Autopilot. How important or unimportant, or do you see that? Because I know, I've been doing this Smart Driving Cars newsletter for 9 years. Well, and when Elon came out and said that he was going to do this, I think he had like 10 people working, and I haven't gone and found my issue, but I said, bull. He just isn't going to do anything with 10 people. There's no way. And, hey, damn thing. Well, it's not what he claims it is. It's pretty damn good. What are your insights in all that?
But the interesting about Elon Musk is that he's able to grasp on to what he thinks the future is going to be, right? So think about the electric car. Early on, the idea that electric cars would become mainstream was pretty hard to believe as well, right? It was
we gave that up in 1905 or something. I think they first lost the steam before they lost the internal combustion engine, but never mind.
Right, and and one of the key things he was able to do, he and the team, and it wasn't just him at that time, it was co-founders Martin Eberhard and others were articulating what that vision of that future would look like, and then they drove towards it, and it was harder than they thought it was going to be. And the same thing you can see it with Autopilot. He got a taste of it. He got a taste of maybe what that could be like. In particular, you have to remember at that time, Google has been very aggressive, as you know, on developing autonomous vehicle technology, but also Mobileye has been in the background as well.
Yep.
I heard an anecdote about him going out, testing what the Mobileye system was like, and just becoming really enamored with that. And what he wanted to do was push it more and more, so the Mobileye system could do more than it was originally capable of doing. And that's what he had his team early on do, was push the limits of what a driver assist system could do, so it could feel more and more like autonomous, even though, as you and I know, ADAS systems are not autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, they are not. And we shouldn't even suggest that they are. We should remind everybody that they aren't. You got to pay attention. Okay, right?
Right. And this causes a drama inside of the company, because people working on these systems know what they are. And there was concern that Musk would go out with time and say that this was fully autonomous vehicle technology, and there was pushback on that. So you see those dramas inside the company early on, and even to this day, his comments about what the cars can do leave a lot of people with pause who understand the technology.
Yeah, and with pause, and I guess some of us even say that he should stop because my goodness, at least what I write, he has a really good product, and it probably is safer than any other entity. Certainly his crash absorption and so on, because he doesn't have an engine up there to come through the firewall and take your legs out. I mean, he has all this shock absorber available for him for crash attenuation. So, beautiful in terms of that design. But he continues to want to talk about the future as if it's here now, and it could be hurting. I mean, it could be hurting.
It's made him a lot of enemies that some of whom we've spoken to on the podcast, Alan, too. So you mentioned, Tim, also that he's got this nose for attracting talent, for finding talent. Does he have the nose to keep them? I guess that's the question. I mean, there seems to be, from what you read, somewhat of a revolving door, at least near the top.
Well, without a doubt, it's very challenging to work for Elon Musk. And, it's interesting when, doing the reporting, I would talk to people who were attracted to him or even still attracted to him. They just don't want to work there anymore. Maybe Elon doesn't want them to work there anymore. I mean, there's some of this thing where one of the kind of common things you see with him is that he becomes attracted to a person. He really gets excited about what this person can do. There's a lot of shine on them. And then after a while, he just, tires on them or, finds their flaws, and then they're kind of on the outs. And so for a lot of people, they have a very short window of time in which they can make impact at Tesla. And in a lot of ways, some people can make a lot of impact at Tesla. It's not the huge bureaucracy that is another automaker. I mean, these automakers, the traditional automakers, are huge silos with paperwork to do paperwork. And that's important for a lot of reasons at those companies because of regulatory concerns and safety and have developed these systems. But at Tesla, it's you can have an imprint. And one of some of the interesting things that I would find when I would talk to people was that, early on, the way he formed some of the culture there, whether it would be, making decisions, he didn't want necessarily decisions being made because something was within the budget. In some ways, he would argue that the budget would, if you were making that kind of decision, you weren't really thinking. He wanted to, if you were going to be spending money, it needed to have a reason. And oftentimes, if you could articulate that reason, then he would just sign off on it. I mean, that was another thing. He was oftentimes signing off on purchases directly and continues to do that for big ones, for even some seemingly small ones. And this was important to him. To kind of create this thinking inside the people making those decisions, or why are we making these decisions, right? So, in some ways he could be very empowering. On the other hand, if something was going wrong, he would get involved in it. If it was an engineering thing, even if it wasn't going wrong, he would seem to delight in getting into the weeds on something, going to the direct engineer directly, not waiting to go through the bosses, but he would just call up somebody and ask them. And so in some ways that teaches the managers, the executives, that they need to tell him what is going on, because he might just go to the source, and then that could be problematic. Senior executives that were being hired were told at a certain point that all Elon does all day is deal with emergencies or fires, if you will, because if it's getting to his level, it's probably a disaster in the making. So, they would be told, well, don't hide anything from him. Let him know what's going, so he's not surprised. He doesn't want to be surprised. All of that sounds like really smart, right? I mean, that sounds like kind of, management textbook kind of stuff. But in practicality, however, that wasn't always the way it would work. And managers over time were conditioned to maybe try to not always be as transparent with him as possible, because if he became interested in something, he might bore down into it, and it might make it a bigger problem than it needed to be in their opinions, right? So I think of 2018, for example. He became very, I think of 2016, he became very interested in the assembly process of the vehicles and wanted more and more automation, because he thought that would allow them to save money over time and be faster. And people around him were cautioning that the moving up timelines the way he was doing and the automation was going to be, there was going to be problems. And those people tended to, find the door really quickly. And those who, wanted to keep their job tended to maybe not, express themselves in a certain way. I think of another period in 2018 where the company desperately needs to have every delivery of its vehicles possible to make its quarterly numbers, because everything's really on the line. And one of the managers speaks up and says, essentially they're not going to make the goal. They're, instead of making 100,000 sales, they're going to make something like 80,000. And that person did not last long after that. And these are the kinds of examples of, like, you needed to speak power to the king, but maybe the king doesn't always want to hear that power, and you might get sideways with him. And so that is one of the tensions you see at Tesla time and time again.
Walter Isaacson, in his review of your book, which is terrific, drew some comparisons between Musk and Steve Jobs, whom you've also covered. Tell us what your thoughts are about that, with these two men, if you look at them.
Exactly. Walter, of course, always talked about the reality distortion field around Steve Jobs. And it definitely, you see Musk envisioning a future and being dead set on attaining that. Some of it, it's interesting. He's a smart engineer, clearly. But sometimes he attacks issues or problems or ideas with some naivete or delusion. And those are sometimes to his benefit. Why can't the world be like this? He does the math, he does the engineering, and says, theoretically, it should be like this. In his mind, it can be like that. And the thing that probably differs him from other people is his risk tolerance and his ability to access capital, the money to do those ideas. I think you see a lot of people who make their fortune and then they're very content to sit on that mound of money and live out the rest of their life. He made a life-changing fortune early on with PayPal and plunged that money into SpaceX, into Tesla. And with Tesla, he basically risked it all. And his ability then to continue to raise money, to sell his vision of the future to people who then handed over billions of dollars to keep the company going, was one of the critical things. So the vision, that what he wanted and the ability to articulate what he wanted got people excited. And that, in a lot of ways, is kind of one of the main stories of Tesla. When people say, how did it get to this point? Well, he sold the world on the idea that the electric car is the way to go. And, it came at a time, he benefited from the fact that increasingly more and more people were concerned about pollution. Regulations and governments around the world were kind of leaning towards looking for solutions. And for years, there was always a debate, especially in the auto industry, what was the right technology for zero emissions, whether it was hydrogen or electric. And everyone was always looking for the perfect solution. Well, he essentially took off-the-shelf batteries. I mean, it's not that case anymore, but took batteries that he could easily get. Martin Eberhard and Tesla did this. And it showed the world that you could do this and people would buy it. And it just kind of grew from there. And so, he saw the world in a different way, and was able to get the money to deliver that world.
Yeah, but he was really elegant as to how he did it. He sold these things to Californians, and I used to say, anybody who buys a Tesla, that's not their only car.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. And so the range anxiety, boom, because he's selling it to people that have a whole fleet of other cars, they can have a toy. And he focused on that. The decision to build the charging infrastructure and do that, how you raise the capital and the effort. And, if you had to go explain that to, a board or something like that and go through all the things, they probably would never see the fundamentals of what that does. Again, it fundamentally attacks this range anxiety problem, which is the key fundamental problem. You go out and did he pay anything for the land that he bought in Nevada to build the battery place out there. I figured that was like a housing development deal. He was, getting the land, going to have something there, and then he could fall back and sell houses. But maybe I'm too naive about what real. I mean, to me, these look like fundamental, basic decisions, not a nuance of a high speed trading in which you make the epsilon on a whole bunch of things. I mean, talk to me here.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit on some very good points there. It's interesting. So early on, the vision for the Model S is being developed, and there are multiple people who have been put into this kind of role of trying to figure out what the car is going to be. And Elon is just frustrated with the work they're doing. And one of the key tensions is that the budget for that car was very small. They wanted it to be a $50,000 car, and he had traditional auto guys working on it. And they're doing the math saying, this is what you get. It's like a Ford Focus, right? And he's wanting, he's wanting something that's going
to big screen.
Right. And so not until
what those big screen cost. I used to buy them 30 years ago. They were,
right, exactly. And so not until, it's one thing to have the vision, but when he became the CEO, then he could just sign off on this. It was, yes, it's good. And when the car came out, it was really, with the one you wanted, it was really $120,000 car, which is a huge difference. If you work at GM and your goal and your mission is to have a car that's going to have a selling price for $50,000, and then it comes out at $120,000, you have done something wrong.
You're not there. You aren't there.
That's not how you become the CEO of General Motors.
It takes you 30 years to get your first promotion. You are never close to that.
Exactly. So, that is the difference of Tesla there. That he had that ability to say, okay, once the Model S was coming out, you're right. A lot of those early buyers, this was one of multiple cars in their garage. So the dependability wasn't necessarily an option and necessarily as big a concern, but that customer service experience, he knew that was key. So you hear stories from those early customers. You might hear some horror stories, but you also hear these stories about like, well, wow, the company really took care of me. I was talking to one guy who was on a road trip in Europe and his car broke, he got a flat tire or something. And the company offered to fly him home and take care of the car just because he was a customer. Now they can't do that with the Model 3 and the Model Y. As you become a mass market car, that customer experience, it's a struggle. And that's where GM and the Toyota and these guys have some other kind of levers they can pull. And that's where you see Tesla struggling today. But if you go back to those early decisions, so he's focusing on to your point, the things that really kind of matter at that time. So the Model S comes out, and then there is really some range anxiety, but the majority of people are really charging their car at their homes, right? So he wanted to appeal to the road tripper, because if you have a car, there's this idea you might go someplace. So in order to save money on the early supercharging stations, what they did was they focused on areas that rich people in Los Angeles and San Francisco would be taking road trips to. Tahoe from in Northern California, Las Vegas and Southern California. So you had a route. So in reality, you only needed a couple stations, and then his team was very savvy, and they would go negotiate these deals. And I'm told that they actually weren't paying a lot for any of this. And that was, in a lot of ways, it was marketing early on. Now it's grown out, and it's thousands of these chargers. And it's a huge moat that they have in an ecosystem that's really hard to compete against. I test drive a lot of vehicles.
It's hard to compete. You said it. It's hard. I mean, he's established himself at the top and made the cost of entry up to his level extremely high, hasn't he? I mean,
now maybe he's creating a new revenue stream by opening up to these charging stations for other electric vehicles.
You could be. He said he's later this year. It comes as governments around the world are talking about building out this infrastructure. So you can imagine a scenario where, if you're going to get government aid to do these, you probably have to be open, right? And so Tesla's smart. They've always figured out ways to take advantage of whatever government incentives out there are available, and that was key early on with the tax credits for buying electric vehicles that could allow the price point to be higher than, essentially you were getting a tax break to defer some of that cost. So a car that was $60,000 maybe didn't look like that. You could maybe tell your wife, hey, it's not really this expensive. But that's one of the things that also energy credits get for selling electric vehicles, they could then turn around and sell to car companies that haven't got into the game as much. And that's really been key as training wheels for the company to get on the road. And the criticism has been, well, they're not making profit because of the cars they sell. Well, the cars, that those credits in effect act as a multiplier on top of the car. So every car that they are selling, they were making actually more money, which helped them get to the point where just this most recent quarter, they posted a more than $1 billion profit, a record for them. And it wasn't just all energy credits. And if they can continue that is the kind of thing they need to fuel this massive growth that Elon has envisioned. The idea of getting to 20 million vehicles a year, that's how he's going to pay for it.
In the over-the-air updating, do you have some? How did they get there to do that? I think that is such a great thing. That, and them, of course, not having any dealers, but in terms of how did they actually do that? Because man, nobody else does that, and nobody else upgrades their vehicle. Everybody else wants it to, as soon as you buy it, they want that thing to be obsolete. So you go in there and buy another one. And then, but to sit there and go to a mechanism in which it actually continues to improve your vehicle as you own it at essentially zero cost, because so much of it is software, and you can improve software. What's your insight on all of that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, over-the-air updates, I know your audience is very sophisticated, but like a cell phone, the software can be updated and the device can be doing something else, right? So
absolutely,
it gets to, one of the benefits that Tesla, originally made early in the day, early on its history, the argument it made to investors when Martin Eberhard was going around, one of the co-founders went around raising money, was that this is a Silicon Valley company, that it is a tech company. And this is one of those examples where that would prove true for them, and that they did have to hire car people, and those car people were very important. But the software capabilities of Tesla are like no other car company. And so they had people in there who knew how to do those things. And that ability, in a lot of ways, is probably, one of the key things that saved the company from a potential disaster early on. And let me take you back in time. So the Model S, the luxury sedan, this is really Elon Musk's bet that if he can bring out a car that people consider better than any other car that just happens to be electric, that it will make the case for the company to go mainstream with what would become the Model 3. And so this was kind of a make or break car. It comes out. And one of the concerns that people had early on with electric cars was you got all these batteries. We're seeing laptop fires with these things. Lithium ion is considered sometimes unstable. And what would happen? Would Tesla vehicles be safe? And early on, there started to be a string of car fires with the Model S. And what was happening was the Model S was driving over road debris. The debris was puncturing the battery pack, and a fire was beginning. And this is a critical time for the company. The stock is beginning to fall. The questions, we've seen these kinds of questions for other automakers really derail them. And for a company that doesn't have a lot of money, that doesn't really have a reputation, this could have been disaster. One of the things they were able to do because of the over-the-air updates was they looked at the situation and they realized if they just tweaked the suspension to raise it up a little bit, it would decrease the probability of those kind of punctures happening by a dramatic amount. And so no other company could do this, but Tesla could simply write code, send it out, and all of a sudden the car just moved up just, a hair a little bit more. The probability fell, and it gave them time to then come up with a physical safeguard as well. And you saw the crashes. You didn't see these kinds of things happening shortly after that. And just a key moment in the company's history where, to your point, OTA really made the day and was a critical thing. And as automakers, competitors are watching that, they realize that there's some real things that Tesla has in its arsenal that they need to watch out for.
I mean, this is fundamental to keep them up there because, the key example, but it's available on all other things. Let me ask you about another thing that bothers me. What's the matter with their automated emergency braking system? Or have you looked at that thing at all? I keep, of course, I have no insight into them, but I just look at all these crashes, starting with the Brown crash in Florida and so on. It's always a stationary object.
Right.
Okay. And the automated emergency braking system should be dealing with that. Now, of course, the problem with stationary objects ahead, when you're driving down the road, there are gazillions of them out there. They're not only the trees and the telephone poles and the parked cars and so on going by you, but there's the sign, there's the overpass above you, there's the tree canopies. They're really in the lane ahead, and they are stationary, and so you have to be really good at both identifying where they are and being certain that you can pass underneath them or pass to the right or to the left of them. Otherwise, if small probability they appear in front of you, then all of a sudden the brakes start going on. So you can't have that, because otherwise then people say, well, what the hell are the brakes going on for? And that's unacceptable. But every once in a while, it is a tractor trailer that is broadside. It is
Right.
a fire truck that's in the lane ahead. It is whatever that you've been following very closely. The guy sees and moves out of there. You keep going. You see holy hell, that's the reason why he did it, but you're not paying attention, and boom, the thing, ugliness. That's what all those supposedly 29 things that NHTSA is looking at. Do you have any insight on what's going on with that? And
Sure.
or have you run into that one?
Yeah, so it gets to, we go back to the conversation about early days of Autopilot and the tension between having an experience that almost lets you think it's an autonomous vehicle versus this challenge of it's not an autonomous vehicle, right?
You got to pay attention.
Right.
You might not have your hands on the wheel, but you got to be able to grab it, right?
Right. And I know that you have probably used Autopilot. I have used it, and it is, especially the first few times you use it as a driver, it is early on, it was an amazing thing. Other automakers now have come up with something very similar, but at the time it was really pushing what you could do, and it gave you more confidence.
Much better than my Mercedes S-Class that I ran out and bought and first one off the line in 2014 because it had Distronics Plus.
Sure.
Damn thing can't lane center worth a damn, although whatever. But,
Sure.
I agree with you.
So people who use it a lot tend to become overconfident in its abilities. And even Elon Musk has said that this is a challenge, that you start to think it can do more than it can really do. And
so why isn't he then saying, damn it, don't relax, as opposed to out there saying, never mind, that's another question. Keep going where you're going.
That's the challenge here, right? So, unlike a General Motors who did their Super Cruise system with the eye tracking and the sensors in the wheel to ensure that you're touching it, he didn't want those kinds of things. A, he would say they didn't work, or B, people around him would talk about how he didn't want a system that seemed to be nagging the driver. In a lot of ways, if you want a seamless kind of feeling that this thing just works. Well, these are the trade-offs that Tesla is making. And you're hitting on something that there's a lot of debate about, and I don't think we've seen a resolution on. What should be allowed with ADAS systems?
Yeah, but at least, what should be allowed with ADAS system? And I know, and Consumer Reports is out there testing the things, and IIHS is out there testing the things and whatever, and trying to see what they could. And it's
Is he worried about telling Tesla owners directly, don't rely on this? It's not really full self-driving, no matter what.
It's not perfect. I mean, nothing's perfect, though. Darn it, damn it. Why
he's asking $10,000 or a couple hundred a month, I guess, for a system that doesn't live up to the moniker.
Well, I mean, it is the only thing that's fully self-driving about it is the name. It's not, the technology is not there yet. And that gets to, you see this pattern of the company selling, early on it was deposits for the vehicle. You were buying into the future. And when he's talking about the vehicle ability to be fully self-driving in 2016, this inside the company was controversial. And there was a camp of people who felt like he was promising something that wasn't possible yet. And there was concern about that. And this is a moment in the company's history where, for some, they felt like he had gone too far, that in the past, he would make these promises about the car's capabilities, and people would look at each other and say, what did he just do? Well, you know, they would work together to make it possible, and they try to achieve it, and they maybe would surprise themselves on what they could do. And here's a point in time where some people feel like he just went too far. And it's evident with the vehicles on the road today that, in fact, they do not have self-driving yet. And so, you know, this.
But he is still making that promise, so to speak, and I think as recently as this weekend, perhaps.
Right. This is one of the ways the company has evolved over time that some people are clearly concerned about.
Well, before we break, I want to get into this. Russ Mitchell, in his LA Times review of your book, made the lead. You're reporting on what happened 5 years ago. You say Apple's Tim Cook was talking to Musk on the phone, and Cook put out the idea of Apple buying Tesla. Musk was interested, but responded. This is a true story. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, what's important here is that this is the story that Elon Musk told his people, that this conversation was happening, and he said, well, I want to be CEO. And Cook supposedly said, well, of course you can be CEO of Tesla under Apple. He said, no, I want to be CEO of Apple. To which, in Musk's recounting, Tim Cook said, F you, and hung up the phone. And now this is, you know, first of all, Tim Cook has said he's never talked to Elon Musk. And since this has come out, Elon says he's never talked to Tim Cook. But that doesn't matter. What's important in this anecdote is this is what Elon Musk was telling his team at a time when the company was in trouble. The Model X production was delayed. Cash was running short. The stock was going down. It's understandable that some people inside the company were hoping that a white knight, a company like Apple, would swoop in and save the day. And the message that Elon Musk was putting out to some people inside that company was that wasn't happening. They were the masters of their fate. They had to solve this problem. And two, this anecdote is important because it is one of many examples in the book that show Elon Musk's ego and his ego and his confidence growing in a way that, when combined in 2016, put the company on the road to near bankruptcy in 2018. And what do I mean by that? In 2016, remember, this is the time when Tesla purchased Solar City. This is when Musk is making these rather grandiose claims about autopilot and self-driving capabilities. And this is when Musk is making the decision to pull ahead production of the Model 3. And all three of these things, people around him are warning him that these are risky decisions, these are risky moves at a time when the company is on the verge of becoming a mainstream automaker. The Model 3 is within sight, and that is going to be a challenge into itself. And so he's making these decisions that, when you fast forward to 2018, the company is on the line. It's staring into the abyss. And it's go back to 2016, and that is when those decisions were made. And so it really kind of hits on this kind of point that with the success of the Model S, Musk he kind of starts to change. And people around him can no longer always reason with him. He becomes kind of his own entity in a lot of ways, and that is part of the drama of this book and of the Tesla story is how he becomes Elon Musk that we all know today.
Well, I mean, don't you
Alan.
think this is a sort of a constant, almost a constant in Silicon Valley, or maybe has been a constant in entrepreneurial industrializations, since day one? I mean, you look at we can go back to look at the struggles of Westinghouse and of Thomas Edison's and Nikola Tesla at the time, when you're innovating with fundamental electricity, and who's going to win, and the kind of tenacity and vision and risk, and almost losing it. One can just look at Amazon post 2000. It's on its back, almost dying. Why in the hell didn't I buy then? Damn it!
Right.
Everybody questioning why weren't they making
I'd be
a
rich
profit,
guy.
right?
Come on, Tim. I'd be rich guy.
Right. To your point, this is a story of the ages.
Yeah.
Of the rise and fall. In this case, we saw another rise. The story of Tesla fundamentally is a story about the fight for control. First, it was Elon Musk fighting to control Tesla itself. Then it was a fight to control what his vision for the company would be. Then it was a fight against the auto industry for what the future of the auto industry would look like. A fight for control against short sellers, a fight for control against regulators, a fight for control really within his own ego to keep himself from sometimes being his own worst enemy. It is, at the end of the day, a huge human drama, a power struggle, if you will, a power play that we can continue to see over and over.
Okay, let me ask you a question along that with respect to the auto industry. I haven't looked at the data, and maybe I should, or maybe it's just looking at the data. If you sort of look at the auto industry relative to this S&P, for example, pre-Musk, and assume that it sort of stays doing what it did relative to the S&P pre-Musk, isn't the whole auto industry above where it would have been if it would have just stayed that way? Hasn't he not only raised his own boat, but raised all the other boats too? Even though or do we have to ask Adam Jonas or something like that?
No, it's a good point. I think people, look at General Motors in particular. How many years were they just kind of bumping along post bankruptcy with their share price, and of great frustration to investors, and I think to even maybe, as I recall, Adam Jonas being a little bit frustrated that they weren't getting more credit for what they were doing. But that's the interesting. So 2018 was the near collapse of Tesla,
right?
And then 2 years later, 2020, they are the world's most valuable automaker. What happened? Right. Well, Elon Musk proved to the world that he could execute. The Model 3 is out there. A lot of people want to say to me, well, why isn't Tesla just the next why is this not a fraud? Well, it's not a fraud. They have Model 3s on the ground. You can buy, I've driven a Model 3. You can go buy a Model 3. A lot of people are buying Model 3s. Yeah. Right. So
my neighbors have them. Damn it. Around Princeton.
The question about for investors was that in 2019, after 2018, they're kind of bouncing around here, the Model 3, it's really hard to get it out. They get a couple profitable quarters and then they don't have profit. And then the investor community are saying, wait a second, there's a lot of frustration that, Elon keeps promising that they're going to be profitable and all these things. And people are losing faith in his ability to execute. So what changed the world was he got that factory that he promised in China opened, despite many people believing not possible. Once that occurred, the idea was, here is Tesla. It is executed on the Model 3. It's getting multiple factories. If Elon can continue to execute, the world will change here. And what that did, that positive outlook, that enthusiasm for the potential, probably got, if you talk to automotive experts, people that follow this, they don't understand the valuation at this point, because you're valuing Tesla at not just being like having huge success, but being the only one that's successful in the world. And we don't need to talk about that. But what it did was it allowed Tesla to address one of the key fundamental problems it's had from the get-go, that it didn't have enough cash. Being in the car business is a cash-eating business. To bash metal, you need a lot of cash. And having the stock price go the way it did, Tesla very easily could raise billions of dollars in capital very cheaply, not give up control, and have a war chest to try to weather any cyclical downturn that any automaker is going to have. So it addressed this huge issue for them. And now they can continue to try to focus on that rapid growth that eats so much cash. And that's what changes Tesla and allows them to have yet another second act and to try to kind of get to that next level.
We'll be back with more, but first, this is a good time to remind you about our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more info, head to motoetf.com. On the website, look for the white paper. It's called the Smart Transportation Revolution. It's under the Insights and News tab. Some great information there about making informed decisions about investing. You may know ETFs can be a smart way to spread risk with investments and focus on a particular category of stocks. The website again is motoetf.com. We're back with more of the Smart Driving Cars podcast and our guest, Tim Higgins from the Wall Street Journal, author of a new book arriving Tuesday, Power Play, Tesla, Elon Musk, and the Bet of the Century. Musk has Tesla, SpaceX, Boring, and brain chip tech going on. I don't know what else. There may be more. Any insights, Tim, into how he does this? How does he divide his time, attention, brain power?
That's always the question. Everybody always wants to know how he does it. And he has the ability to focus on certain things at certain times. I remember talking to one engineer about Elon, and this person, I said, all these crazy things are happening in 2018, yet there's still meetings. He's still meeting about vehicle issues, and he would come into the meetings and be totally focused on what was going on, whatever engineering thing, he'd just totally get into it. And these people would be, they'd be looking on Twitter and saying like, there's a lot of other stuff going on too. One of the challenges for them is sometimes you might have even less patience in those periods of time. And so if you had to tell Elon Musk some bad news, you want to try to figure out it would be on a day that he would be less wound up. And so at a certain point, you were definitely following the gossip rags to see where his head was at on things. But how does he manage running all this stuff? He essentially, I think about it as like Elon Inc., and he's the top of it. And he's got Tesla, which is its own company, SpaceX, which is his own company. These other companies that you mentioned, they all kind of funnel up into his office, and he spends, depending upon where the emergency is or where his whatever the biggest thing, most important thing is where he's putting his attention. So when it was Model 3 production hell, he was spending a lot of time on that issue. And he likes to say that he was sleeping on the factory floor, and that that's where his time was. He does a lot of video calls with other places. He's on his jet all the time, going between places. The key thing, though, from people I talk to, is he seems to focus on whatever is the most pressing issue that needs to be dealt with. And that is kind of where his attention is. So in a lot of ways, he is kind of hopping from fire to fire. At least at the point in these stories on Tesla, that was kind of how he was operating.
After all of your reporting and the work on this book, what are your thoughts about where Tesla and Musk are going to be in 5 years? I know that's a dangerous thing to ask with all of the new electric vehicle competition.
Tesla's going to face increasing competition, no doubt about it.
But he knew that and invited it in many ways, right?
He wanted it. He absolutely wanted it. In some ways, if there is no more Tesla tomorrow, it had met its goal, and its original goal was to make the wake the auto industry up to the idea of electrification. That kind of was one of the goals of the company. And so they have reached it, right? But he's not going to be content with that. And so, the challenge is with these other car companies, for so often we've talked about what's going to be the Tesla killer, what vehicle is going to come out that is just going to smoke the Model S or the Model 3. And I think a lot of people have been disappointed because that's never happened, right? You see something come out and it kind of nibbles at it, it takes a little bit's market share. And that really is probably going to be the biggest challenge for Tesla in the next few years, is not the Tesla killer, but the Tesla market nibbler. These car companies with something in each segment that takes away a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and this becomes a real competitive race, just like Toyota, General Motors, and Ford fighting over points and market share, rather than just Tesla having green pastures in the EV space. That'll be hard. It'll be hard for Tesla to adapt to a sales and service model that can handle all of these new customers that they project. One of the challenges that's really clear in Power Play is the balance that Elon has to make between investing in production and investing in sales and service. Sales and service is not something that he likes to get in the nitty-gritty on. He clearly loves to get into the engineering stuff. He likes to have a good customer experience, but the blocking and tackling of sales is not necessarily something that he's shown a lot of strength at. And you continue to see with the company that each kind of quantum leap, if you will, of size that the company goes through when it comes out with new products, there's always problems with the sales and service part. And so, which in some ways they had a pass with the Model S, because to your point earlier on, or to the point of our conversation earlier on, the Model S appealed to people who had multiple cars, and they could be okay if the car was in the shop for a while. You know, they might not like it, but it was kind of, they were accustomed maybe to having luxury cars that were temperamental, so it wasn't out of the realm. But when you start talking about people who this is the car that is going to take them to their job every day, their daily driver, that patience goes out the window, and you know, at a certain point. And so maintaining that brand loyalty and getting them to buy the second car, the third car, a lifetime of cars, that is going to be one of the big challenges that they have going. And then third, I would say one of the clear challenges that the company has is developing a leadership team that can take over from Elon, but maybe not in 5 years, but that has the kind of the management chops to run the world's most valuable automaker. He has an ability, as we've talked about, to find great talent, but one of the things that is developed there is sometimes are the people around him may not have that kind of lengthy experience in the auto industry or running other companies, but they have experience managing up to Elon and all of his pros and cons. And you know, that would be, you know, being a challenge. It would be a challenge there. So the question of, you know, who will be the CEO in the future is going to begin to become a bigger kind of question mark as time goes on.
Alain, a couple of other quick headlines from the latest Smart Driving Cars newsletter before we wrap up. Nikola founder Trevor Milton has been charged with lying to investors. He was indicted on charges of securities fraud and wire fraud. And that's one of the big headlines in the newsletter and elsewhere.
Yeah, well, you know, speaks for itself. You know, what can you say? I don't want to say anything.
The Phoenix New Times had a headline asking, and this is something that you've asked before, was the backup driver in an Uber autonomous car crash wrongfully charged? The report focuses on a motion asking that the case be sent back to a grand jury because the previous one did not get to hear information critical to the case, according to the attorneys.
That one I do have an opinion on, and I'm an outspoken opinion on that. Maybe Tim can comment on my opinion too, but I think yes. I mean, come on. What are they doing charging, you know, some worker who's, you know, whatever. There was problem in the code. And if you want to charge anybody there, charge the folks who wrote the code. I mean, come on. You know, the system saw her 6 seconds before it hit her. Okay. And the code was written to disregard stationary objects ahead. Okay. It was written that way. Why? Because of the unreliability and the detection of those things, and so on, identification and so on and so forth. And they didn't want to hit the brakes, you know, too often. Therefore, what do they do? And that never happens. And therefore, you know, disregard it. It's in the code. Somebody looks at the code, they'll find it. You know, the automated emergency braking system was supposed to be on if you were traveling at greater than 48 miles an hour. They were traveling at 41. Okay, come on. All right. And not that you want to put the code writers in jail or indict them, but there has to be responsibility there by those who write the code, because in the end, when all this stuff goes out there and is actually there, you know, the person that the entities that wrote the code, it's the code that's doing the right driving. And that's the thing that's responsible. And then you have to go and talk to those folks. Now, we all know that you don't know what you don't know. And so we all try to learn. And the other comment will comment on the New York Times article about how bad, beta testing is. No, beta testing is not bad. And you don't do beta testing on a closed course because you already did that. You already know that. You already got all the information from a closed course. That's the easy stuff. You do beta testing because you have to go up against Mother Nature, and she's tough. And she throws curveballs and sliders and stuff you can't hit, and so it shows up with new stuff. And somehow you have to, encounter those. And of course, you want to make sure that the people that are doing that are helping you and working with you and doing that. And we argued here, or at least I've argued, Elon needs to tone it down and say, hey, be a little bit more responsible in doing this, because it really doesn't do what the words. If you went up to Webster's and looked them up and did the, whatever, and doesn't do that. And he should admit it. He has a great product there. And through all this, it can get better. But if you let the people that are out there doing it think that they can, whatever, and become loose cannons on the ship, you're in trouble. So anyway, those are my comments. Tim,
any
you want
thoughts
to come
about the
back and
prospects
have a comment
of
on my
Elon toning it
comment?
down?
But anyway, I mean, it's contra. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch you. What was the question?
I was saying, any thoughts about the prospects of Elon toning it down?
I don't think Elon tones anything down. So, you're seeing the Uber crash, 2017 was tragic, but also in some ways an important wake-up call probably for the industry in a whole.
Agree.
A lot of people were chasing a lot of dollar signs, and the expectations for what the technology could do had grown to be very unrealistic. And it's at the point we don't have robot taxis for the world yet. That technology is not quite ready, and we don't know when it'll be ready. And that crash and that death is a horrible reminder that people's lives are at stake in a way that Silicon Valley is not accustomed to, right? When you try to go fast and break things, when you're making software for selling ads or having cool pictures on your smartphone, people's lives are not at risk. And it's an ongoing tension that we see here as Silicon Valley becomes more engulfed in auto space. Where we see it with Tesla is that bringing some of that excitement and razzle dazzle of tech to cars is very cool, but also there does need to be the kind of the trade-off of safety, and it's a tension that we're seeing for a lot of companies.
Yeah, responsibility, and I call it proper behavior as opposed to misbehavior. I mean, the 90% of crashes or whatever that people talk about, and so on, humans' involvement, it's all human misbehavior. It's because, we pick up our cell phone, we look at our cell phone, and we fall asleep, we drink too much, all the other, that's all misbehavior. So we've got to make sure that on this, especially when we're doing the beta testing, and especially when we're doing all that, is that we don't misbehave. This is serious business. And yes, you get a great deal of comfort and convenience, and it is really valuable, and it is really nice, and it is really easy to drive if the car is basically steering itself, and then you don't have to look at your speedometer to make sure you're not doing whatever, you don't run up somebody's rear end and all that sort of stuff. It's all, but boy, it's not perfect. It's not near perfect. It's pretty darn good, but you got to pay attention. You can't misbehave with it.
Well, again, the book that's coming out Tuesday is called Power Play, Tesla, Elon Musk, and the Bet of the Century. Tim Higgins, the author, thank you so much for taking the time with us. We really appreciate it, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you for your interest.
And Tim, thank you very much. Thank you for writing it, and thank you for making it available to all of us. Thank you. Have a great one.
Yep, you too.
Thank you to our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO, and more information is available at motoetf.com. You can find us at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, Google, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts. You can get those smart speakers to play us too. You can find my tech reports at textination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin along with Alain Kornhauser. Thank you for listening or watching, and please continue to stay safe.
Thank you. And thank you, Tim. Thank you, Fred.